Today's episode is sponsored by Match.com. 1 in 3 relationships starts online, and more start on Match than any other dating site. To try out Match for free for 7 days, go to Match.com/together. I'm Eric Newton, and this is The Together Show. We all know relationships take work, but what is that work, and how do we do it? As a former divorce lawyer, I've watched thousands of couples break up firsthand. Having seen the worst in relationships, I decided to try to help couples stay together. So on this show, we talk to real couples and find out what love really looks like.
And I think the sex drive evolved to get you out there looking for a whole range of partners. Romantic love evolved to enable you to focus your mated energy on just one. And feelings of attachment enables you to tolerate this person, stick with this person, at least long enough to raise a single child through infancy as a teen.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for listening. Today's episode is a bonus episode that I'm very excited to release. I've wanted to interview Dr. Helen Fisher ever since I saw her extraordinary TED Talk about the brain in love. And since then, she's done 2 more TED Talks. I'll link all those in the show notes. She's so insightful and so dynamic in all of these talks that I knew I had to have her on as a guest. And I got to tell you, this is the benefit of having a sponsor like Match. It turns out that Dr. Fisher is their chief scientific advisor. And so they were able to set up an introduction for me. So I made my way over to her gorgeous apartment in Manhattan during that school closing snowstorm that they had last week. And we recorded this interview. And I got to say, when the interview was over, I told Aubrey that I had fallen in love with another woman, but that I was far too young and she would never have me. That actually went over far better than I had any right to expect. Anyway, I had a blast with this one, and I really hope you will as well. Now, I'm breaking this down into 2 parts. In the first half, I wanted to learn a little bit about Dr. Fisher as a person and to understand her views on the broader sociological and biological motivations driving our behavior around dating and love. We discuss monogamy versus polyamory, jealousy, divorce, and the roots of this feeling that we call love. In the second half of the interview, which I'll release as a bonus episode next week, we get down to the finer details for each of us as individuals, including Dr. Fisher's advice for singles in search of a partner. You'll definitely want to check that one out. It was a lot of fun. And so with that, let's go to the first part of our interview with Dr. Helen Fisher. Dr. Fisher, thank you so much for being on the show. It's really a pleasure to be here.
I'm delighted to be here.
Your home is lovely,
by
the
you.
way. This is exactly my this is my taste.
Yeah.
You've captured what I love perfectly.
All of these books, or what?
Yes, and the colors, and it's so warm. It's inviting. There's at least 5 places in this room alone that I could sit and read a book for hours.
You know, that's so lovely to say. And what I wanted is, I lived in one room until I was 51. My great ambition was to have a bedroom by the time I was 50. Didn't happen. My mother died and left me just enough money to buy a bedroom. And I bought this place. And I wanted it to be 2 things, elegant and comfortable.
Yeah,
I want it comfortable.
You nailed it. Well, speaking of, thanks for giving me the nice chair.
Well, thank you.
I feel very honored by that.
You're my guest.
Well, that raises a question of this concept of success.
Mm-hmm.
You had one room until you were 50, you said.
Yeah, 51.
How do you define success? Because I think by most measures you are very successful at this point. Mm-hmm. Does it resonate for you? Do you think of yourself as successful?
I think I'm only beginning to now, and I'm old now, and
you're old.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Should I say? No, I'm not going to say.
I don't know if you need to say, but I don't think you're old.
Well, I don't act old, and I don't feel old, and I run for an hour every day, and I go out every night, and I'm in every day, so I don't act old. And I don't look old, but I am old. Anyway, but the bottom line is, what was your question?
Well, how do you define success?
Oh, yeah.
And do you feel successful? 2 separate questions, but...
Nobody's ever asked me whether I feel successful. No, I've never felt successful.
Right.
I've never looked up on myself on Google to see anything. I don't know how many of my books sell. The only thing I do save is my most important thing after I die. Probably goes straight into the garbage, but it's all the letters from people who write to me and say, that was a wonderful speech, or I finally understand why I divorced him or her, or I finally understand why somebody was adulterous, or I finally understand why I was addicted to this or that. Those letters are my most special, by far my most special thing. That's the history of me. So, but feel successful. I don't walk down the street and have people say, hey, Helen. I basically stick to my knitting. I really do. I mean, what's important to me is that you're here, is that there are people here who are interested in my work. And so, yes, I feel overjoyed that I've been able to do so much with my life. No question about that. All of this brain scanning has been... My mother thought I was going to be a secretary in Boston.
Really?
She thought she was very smart, and my older brother and sister were smart, but Helen and Lorna, my twin sister, we were nice girls. And so I didn't grow up with it. I mean, she was lovely, really, in many ways. I mean, she did think that I could do anything with my life that I put my mind to. But I think I'm successful. I think people around the world know more about love. And that's what I would regard as success. I've been able to get the ideas out. I will do it till the day I die. I'm going to die just putting my head down on my desk and dying. I'm sure it's going to be. Who wrote that book, To the Finland Station? Do you remember?
No.
Well, Wilson is his last name. Anyway, he put his head down on his desk and died, and that's going to be me.
The character or the author?
The author.
In the midst of writing, I hope.
In the midst of writing. Yeah, that will be me. I go out every night. I work all day. I get up very early, and I like working, and I certainly work all weekend. I work in airports. I work in planes and buses and trains and on the subway, and I like what I do. I'm interested in what I do.
Clearly.
Yeah.
When you get those letters from people who've been impacted by your work, what is it about those that's the most touching to you?
They understand themselves better. I've added to them. And yeah.
Is there a theme in that? Do you get more letters about, you mentioned sort of the highlights, adultery or why they broke up. Is there a theme through these letters that?
Well, there's a lot of letters that say, I saw your talk, your TED talk on thus and thus, and it really made me understand my marriage better. Or thank you for making this speech in Hyderabad, India 2 months ago. An awful lot of people came and they said a lot of great things about it. So they're not all just that I've helped somebody. They are laudatory letters that make me feel better that I made the right speech to the right audience and they heard it, and the people who sponsored me were delighted that they did hire me, that kind of thing. So it's two kinds of letters. But I get, for example, I get telephone calls too from all over the world.
Really?
Yeah, I got one recently from Angola.
That's lovely. They can get through to you.
Yeah. Well, they don't always get through to me, but emails always get through to me. And I've got two on my machine now. One from Malaysia, and one from Argentina. But I get about 20 calls a week from the press. They want to know this, that, or the next. They're very imaginative, the press. They're more imaginative, really, than a lot of scientists, because scientists are really faced down into one, silo, one angle, whereas the public comes up with all kinds of fascinating ideas that I never would have thought of.
Like what? What's blown your mind recently?
Let's see what happened today. My problem is that it's just
There's
too much.
There's so many. I know the feeling.
But I wish I had written down more of my answers because they provoke me to think in new ways.
Right, yes.
And I'm ashamed of myself for not writing down some of the things that I said.
You could make a book just out of that.
I'm sure I could. Some of the ideas. Because, everybody, people pine for love, they live for love, they kill for love, they die for love. It's like the fear system in the brain. And everywhere people feel that madness. And here's a wonderful moment. I've gone to 99 countries in my life, just for pleasure largely, but certainly on business, but a lot on pleasure too. And I was happening to go along the Palmyra Highway of Tajikistan. Tajikistan is just above Afghanistan, and there's this real dirt road that goes just above the river that borders Afghanistan from Tajikistan. And there were three of us traveling together, and we would take turns being in the front seat of the car. And I was in the front seat, and everybody finds out that I study love, and so they tell me their story.
Right.
And this guy, a lovely guy, I mean, handsome, young, broke, just poor guy. His wife had died when she was very young, so he was left with 4 children. Anyway, he would fall madly in love with this woman.
With a new woman?
With a new woman, yeah, okay. Many years after his wife died. And sure enough, he was saying to me, he said, I don't know, sometimes she disappears for the night. She doesn't seem to want to have any interest in my children. She recently called me by another man's name. He's having trouble.
Yeah.
So then he gave me the following line, and I read a lot of poetry. I've never seen this line anywhere. He said, "Love is like war. It's easy to get into and hard to get out of." Isn't that cool?
It's so hard and painful to get out of.
And so all over the world, I hear people tell stories. Another story, you may have heard it. I've said it several times on the podium, but I was in the highlands of New Guinea. And I was in the back of a very beat-up van. I mean, very, very very beat up. And I was in the back of this van with 4 locals. And one of the men had 3 wives. They probably all had 3 wives, but he was the one that spoke English. So I asked him how many wives he would like to have. And there was this long pause. And I thought, is he going to say 5? Is he going to say 10?
He went down, didn't he?
He said, none.
Oh, no, I didn't think it was going to go to 0.
None. And he made a very good point, which is multiple wives is a toothache. It's a toothache. And then another guy chimed in. He said, "You know what? Up here in the highlands of New Guinea, you can't have 2 wives because every single time you're not with one, that one knows you're with the other. You have to have 1 or 3 or more.
Or 3 or more.
So that, because we are a jealous animal. I mean, millions of years, this is what my books are about. We evolved the human drive to pair up and rear our young as a couple. Now, this isn't to suggest that we're sexually faithful to our partners, but we do that. We pair up. And along with that came the evolution of jealousy and possessiveness.
Right.
And even in cultures where everybody, all men are permitted to have several wives, so many men do. It's part of the customs of the culture. Women still get jealous. Men still feel guilty. And so, I mean, these are basic to the human animal, our drive to love, our drive to form an attachment, our drive to rear our children as a team.
Well, speaking of jealousy, what do you think of the rise of non-monogamy in our popular culture?
Isn't it fascinating?
It is.
It is just fascinating.
I have thoughts myself, but
Yeah.
I'm not
good.
going to cloud.
Oh, what a pity.
What you're? Well, I'll
You
I'll
start
say what,
first. You start first. You want me
to
to start first? I don't
No,
care.
I want to hear from you first so that
Okay.
I don't influence what you'll say. It'll
Okay.
be more fun that way.
Okay. Well, first of all, polyamory, I think is what you're talking about, or just multiple.
Well, so the way I have it is non-monogamy is the broader umbrella.
Yeah.
And then within that are these categories of non-monogamy. There might be swingers.
Right.
There might be polyamorous, strictly polyamorous people.
Right.
Or people who have sexual relationships that don't consider themselves either of those, but that are outside of the marriage.
Like open. Would you call that an open marriage?
I would call that an open marriage, yeah.
What's so interesting is that this is evolving so rapidly that we don't really have a very clear idea of these various things. And by the way, I studied this year with Match. We do an annual study called Singles in America.
Right.
And we don't poll the Match population. We poll the American population. So it's a representative sample of Americans based on the U.S. Census. It's a scientific study.
Oh, that's great. Well, how do you,
Yeah.
you must have to, how do you get all those numbers?
Okay. So we start in August making about 200 questions in all. And then beginning of October, middle of November. Anyway, the bottom line is we give it to a research company that goes on the internet and gets this representative sample of Americans.
Got it.
So all the data comes back, and we get over 5,000 people every single year, and we've done it for 7 years. So that's over 35,000 people. It's the largest study of singles in the United States and probably the world.
And are these anonymous surveys?
Yes, they're
Great,
anonymous.
great.
And also, we've got the right number of blacks, whites, Asians, Latino, gay, straight, rural, suburban, urban, every part of the country, and every age group, age 18 to 71 plus. So we can cross-tab. I mean, I know what singles have for dinner. I know how many orgasms they have per sexual bout. I know where they pick people up. I know what they're looking for in a partnership. I know we were deluged in data.
And you think they're answering accurately because it's anonymous? Or truthfully,
I am a person who creates questionnaires. And the last questionnaire that I did for Match, 14 million people have taken. There's 3 ways you can answer a questionnaire: with who you really are, with who you want to be, or with who you want others to think you are.
Right.
Now, nothing can get around that. But there are studies that show that if you answer questions on the internet, you're quite a bit more likely to answer honestly.
Oh.
And they are anonymous. We don't know their names. And we have their zip code, but we don't know that. We know they're male, female. We know how much money they make. If they'll say, we know about their education. We know about their sexual orientation. We know all kinds of things about them. And then we can cross-tab. But anyway, back to polyamory, open relationships, swinging, and non-monogamy. It fascinates me. And it fascinates me because, so this year we did ask, have you ever been in an open relationship? And have you, how do you feel about polyamory, which is apparently these days a more serious commitment to more than one person. But you have a commitment to several people, maybe 3 men if you're a woman.
Right.
And with an open relationship, it's more likely you have a deep commitment with only one person, and that you agree to, that you can either sleep around with others or you can sleep around and have romances with others.
Right.
So those are the 2 biggest ones. Swingers are different. Swingers want to have sex with others, but they go together as a couple. They're always in the same room. They never meet anybody without their partner. They go together, they come home together, and they have sex. But they stay away from the romance part of it.
Right.
Whereas in polyamory, it's poly meaning many, amory meaning loves.
And it may or may not involve sex, actually.
Exactly. What do I think about it? They like me, by the way, because I think that we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction. Sex drive, feelings of intense romantic love, and feelings of deep attachment. And I think the sex drive evolved to get you out there looking for a whole range of partners.
Right.
Romantic love evolved to enable you to focus your mating energy on just one. And feelings of attachment enables you to tolerate this person, stick with this person, at least long enough to raise a single child through infancy as a team. So the bottom line is they have liked me. They've come to me in the past. They even used to send me their magazine, Loving More. I don't know if that's still around.
Oh,
Loving
I don't know.
More.
I don't know about that.
But anyway, they liked me because they endorse this idea that there are these 3 broad brain systems: sex drive, romantic love, feelings of attachment. And most of them really want to have a solid attachment. Traditionally, they wanted a solid attachment to one person, but they wanted permission and transparency to have not only sex with other people, but romance with other people.
Right. And that would be the traditional polyamory.
Yeah. And so they basically, they have lots of rules, and you got to follow the rules. And
as with everything.
As with everything. But their rules are very rigid. I mean, they sort of have to be. I mean, they have long discussions during the week of how they feel. They often are jealous, but feel that they cognitively think this is the right thing to do. I should let her have this romance, et cetera, et cetera. And so they try to beat back their jealousy or understand their jealousy or air their jealousy or whatever. Whereas in regular pair-bonded relationship, you don't spend every day discussing your jealousy.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So these people are really... So I admire them in spirit. I admire the fact that they are transparent, that they're not sneaking around, that they are keeping it open. They're being completely honest with each other, and they're playing a fair game. I don't think the human animal is built for that. Now, some people can do it. And I'm not surprised that it's being really picked up by the young. because at this point, the young they're marrying much later. They're putting career first instead of family. Even women, in the old days, a woman would give up her career for family. Now she's postponing family for career. And so they've got this long period of time, in much of their late teens and 20s and even early 30s, to practice at a lot of things. And I think that most of them will end up falling madly in love with just one person and settle down and forgo this. There's going to be some that do. Now, in the Singles in America study, we asked this year,
right, that's right.
How do you approve of polyamory? And something like 68% approved of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is a phenomenal number.
Yeah, but only 6% had ever done it.
Had tried it. Okay.
Yeah.
What are the odds that you'll get a date by this weekend? Well, if you're on Match, they're pretty good. 1 in 3 relationships start online, and more start on Match than any other dating site. So if you're single and looking to meet people, you've got to get on Match. We already know that online dating works, and Match is the way to go. They're not only number 1 in first dates, but in second dates too. Match makes it easy to find that great connection. You can also download the Match app to have matches sent directly to your phone. Meeting your match has never been easier. Just go to match.com/together, and for a limited time, you can try Match for 7 days free. That's 7 days completely free to search and connect with thousands on Match. So go ahead, create your account now at match.com/together. That's match.com/together. But but this is the first time you'd asked, so we don't know. But I would guess that represents a huge increase in the approval numbers over the last several years, even.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it is all over popular culture now, and people are starting to realize that it's not necessarily immoral. That the ethical constraints around it, while maybe rooted in our biological structures, are not necessarily chiseled in marble.
Oh, it's so interesting that you think of the ethics. To be honest, I never thought of that. I thought of the practicality. I thought of the jealousy. Different moral systems are, it's really not unlike polygyny. Poly meaning many and gyne meaning women. I began to think about that the other night. There are men all over. 86% of world cultures permit a man to have several wives.
And polyandry is
a woman with
Tibet?
several men.
Right. Okay.
Yes, it's Tibet. Tibet's one of the good examples.
Primarily, right.
Primarily, yeah, and also the northwest coast of southern Alaska.
Oh.
There's but very few places is it institutionalized that a woman can have several husbands.
Yeah.
Whereas it's less than 0.05% of cultures permit a woman to have several husbands, among the very rich and among the very poor. In Tibet, it's among the very poor, and it's when you have one farm and you've got 4 sons. And if you divide that farm into four smaller parts, you're not going to have a farm anymore.
Right.
And so they are required really to take one woman and have that one woman be shared by the 4 men. The problem with that is when you read these ethnographies, one son is 6 years old, he doesn't care. Another is 18 and he wants a 15-year-old. And another is 25 and he's the one that picks the girl. And so the 6-year-old keeps playing on the farm and the 18-year-old finds a woman in town and the older, et cetera, et cetera. So they find ways to really actually form pair bonds, even though it's institutionalized, it's polyandry. And among polyandrous people on the northwest coast of southern Alaska, like the Tlingit or the Kwakiutl, or I don't think they're polyandrous anymore, I would guess. But traditionally, women were extremely powerful. Yeah. They were the traders. The men, rowed the canoe, but the women were the traders. And if she wanted several husbands because she was rich, she could have them.
Yeah.
But that's uncommon.
So when I was in Tibet recently, our guide came from a farming family.
Mm-hmm. Were you in Lhasa?
That's where we began our journey,
Yeah.
and we traveled all across the country and had an absolutely epic.
Isn't it great?
It is.
Except for those
ordinary
Chinese.
Well, it is so oppressive.
It is so oppressive. There was a little Chinese man with a big gun.
Yes.
Halfway down every corner. I felt like kicking him in the knee.
Fire extinguishers and shotguns was what we saw everywhere we looked.
And the people are so sweet.
Lovely. And the only way they protest that oppression is to set themselves on fire, which is just heartbreaking.
It's horrible. Yeah. Well, anyway.
So
but
our guide.
polyamory. Oh, sorry.
I was just briefly going to talk about what I observed was that exactly what you were saying. His parents wanted him to marry his brother's wife, and he was such a good, devout, Buddhist, loyal son, and he was going to do it, but. As you're saying, he had a girlfriend in town.
Sure.
And she was a Westerner.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh, my God. So he's going to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
She's going to have to deal with that.
Well, I think it was already on the way out.
Okay.
She was already leaving. But it was he was going to do it. Because it was the right thing to do as far as he was concerned.
Yeah.
And actually, he didn't bat an eye. There was, even with his exposure to the West, he still knew that was the right moral thing to do. Yeah. Even though he was biologically being driven a different direction.
Absolutely. Well, we have, yes. Well, I mean, I think that, very recently, suddenly we've got the term "till death do us part" is going out of style.
Right. Yes, it is.
And I've long studied divorce, and even the word broken marriages. I grew up when there was one girl in my first grade who came from a broken home.
Oh my goodness!
The word is gone. I mean, it is gone. In hunting and gathering societies, they tend to have 2 or 3 spouses during the course of their lives. So serial pair bonding, a series of pair bonds, is very common for the human animal. What's not common is that these days, when we break up, we don't have a local community around us to help out. On the grasslands of Africa, first of all, nobody argued about who owned what. He owned his bow and arrow. She owned her digging stick and her baskets. Nobody argued over who owned the child. The child was part of a particular clan. And if the man or the woman gets up and walks out, you still have aunts and uncles and cousins and all kinds of people around the children, so they aren't totally disrupted. So it's divorce is very natural to the human animal. Now, not to say that we all do it. We don't all do it. But I actually do believe we're going to see more long, happy marriages. We should talk about that. But divorce is nothing new. What is new is the lack of the support system around the couple, helping to deal with the children.
Well, let me, to put a period on the sentence of the non-monogamy, let me ask a specific question about it. Do you, and this may be outside of your realm of thinking, but do you think there's value that can be derived from exploring the jealousy, the way that community seems so focused on doing?
I think there's value in understanding who you are and what your limits are, what you can take, what you can give, how you're going to give it, how you're going to express yourself. Sure, as long as you don't do it. Some people seem to be in these relationships because they're so madly in love with a particular person and they're willing to go along, to get along.
I wonder about that. I mean, that is the stereotype.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's doing a disservice to the people who are genuinely...
And to themselves. They're doing a disservice to themselves too. I mean,
those people are, yeah. But I mean, I wonder if we thinking that most of that... You didn't say most.
No.
You didn't say most.
No, I think an awful lot of these people are young.
Yeah.
They have several boys. Let's say it's a girl, I'm a girl. They have several men that they really like. They like sleeping with all 3 of them. Yeah. And if all 3 of them can tolerate each other and be willing to go that route, and they don't want to have children yet. Yeah. The young are very ambitious these days, I think. And I think they are exploring. And, they can afford to explore. The young aren't scared of getting pregnant anymore. They know how to handle that.
Yeah.
They know how to avoid disease.
Right.
They don't have to walk the walk of shame if they've got a one-night stand.
And they're financially self-sufficient, so they can explor these things.
Exactly. And I do think that the vast majority of them, that the basal ganglia of the brain, the ventral tegmental area, the little factory that pumps out dopamine and gives you that intense rush of feelings of romantic love, will eventually hit the vast majority of them. And they will fall madly in love with somebody, and along with that comes possessiveness. And maybe, so, I mean, I don't know. We're going to have to see. But we are naturally a pair bonding animal.
Okay.
So there's always going to be people who aren't, or are, they are serially pair bonding, whatever. But that will probably triumph.
And the reason that we're naturally pair bonding is biologically derived, right? I mean, it's the most resource efficient way for us to survive, procreate, and do what we need to do. Is that roughly what you would say?
97% of mammals do not pair up to rear their young. Only 3% do. And there's got to be a very good reason. There's good ecological reasons for people to pair up, because the bottom line is, like elephants. I mean, why stick with one if you can copulate with more? You know,
Right.
And I trace this in my book, which comes out actually on Valentine's Day, my second edition of Anatomy of Love. I trace it back 21 million years ago, and I get our ancestors, who are very promiscuous, actually, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans. They don't form pair bonds to rear their young, that's for sure. We came down out of the trees. We began to have to stand up on 2 feet instead of 4 in order to carry sticks and stones and weapons and food. And with the beginning of bipedalism, walking on 2 feet, ancient females could no longer carry their baby on their back. They were no longer quadrupedal. They were no longer living in the trees where they could protect themselves. And they're now wandering through very dangerous open grasslands, carrying the equivalent of a 20-pound bowling ball in their arm, baby. And I think they began to go over what I call the monogamy threshold. They began to need a partner, at least during the infancy of their child, to help feed and protect them. And how could a male wandering through the grasslands of Africa 1 million years ago protect a harem of females, if not from lions and buffaloes, from other males?
Yeah.
So pair bonding became essential to females and suitable to males. And we evolved the brain circuitry for extended periods of attraction, we call it romantic love, and deep feelings of attachment. And we carry in us those brain systems for romantic love and feelings of deep attachment. And I think that a lot of these polyamorous people are going to be
hit by that. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you also say that divorce, just turning briefly off of, or a little bit off of polyamory, you say that divorce is natural also.
Right.
So does that follow along in that line of thinking?
Yes.
So what's the reason for that? We eventually split off to mate again?
Yes.
And raise another child, and that is more a diverse offspring?
Well done. Very well done.
Thank you.
I remember the moment that came to me in the middle of the night, and I wrote my PhD. No, I wrote a book on it. I went to the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations looking for patterns of divorce. Not divorce rate, not how many people divorce, but when they divorce, how many children they have, how old they are, how many children they have. And I can't remember the third one. Anyway, bottom line is, as it turns out, I now studied this in 80 cultures. If you're going to divorce, you tend to divorce during and around the 4th year of marriage. I was terribly disappointed. I was hoping it would be 7.
Because of the movie.
The movie. And because if you remain married for... so I began to realize, and also, if you're going to divorce, most people divorce with no children. That makes a lot of sense. It's easier to divorce if you don't have a lot of property and children. But... almost 25% of people who divorce around the world who do divorce divorce with 1 dependent child, not 2. Now, 2 dependent children would take you about 7 years because the human birth spacing is about 4 years. So the bottom line is, I had thought a man and a woman would pair up. This was my hypothesis. It was wrong. I figured that a man and a woman would pair up for about 7 years in order to raise 2 children through infancy, because to reproduce the 2 of them. But then I found it's not true. If you're going to divorce around the 4th year of marriage and have only 1 child. And the human birth spacing in hunting and gathering societies is 4 years. So it began to occur to me that exactly what you just said is right, that we are originally evolved the drive to fall in love and pair up and stay together at least long enough to rear 1 child through infancy.
Yeah.
And then if it wasn't a good relationship, now the child joins a multi-age playgroup. So a 5-year-old can be taken care of by a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old and aunts and uncles and cousins. So the real purpose of the pair bond becomes less important. And if you then broke up and had children with a different partner, then you would create more genetic variety in your young. Eric, you got it. You got it. And so, a woman will come up to me today and she'll say, oh, I was a failure at love. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? She said, well, I had 3 husbands. I said, oh, do you have any children with them? She said, yeah, I had 2 children with the first husband and 1 child with the second. Well, from a Darwinian perspective,
as successful as you can be.
She's yes. Now, these days, unfortunately, on the grasslands of Africa, they had fights, no question about it. Mankind's always had fights over love. But they didn't have to argue over property. They didn't have to argue over who owned the kid. And the children were in a stable setting. And they would go on to have children with another person, passing on to the human animal a tremendous drive to fall in love, form a pair bond, and start having babies, but also a restlessness in long relationships, a tendency to divorce, and a tendency to remarry. So this whole thing of till death do us part, that evolved on the grasslands when we began to settle down on the farm. On the farm, for the last 10,000 years, you really can't chop a cow in half and take half of it out of town.
Right.
You really can't move half the wheat field out of town. So you're stuck. So then we evolved this huge pile of credos to make us stay together for life.
Right.
It's probably not. Now, there's some people that can do it. I'm not suggesting that it's not possible. And in fact, I think we're going to see more people do it for various evolutionary reasons. But anyway.
Well, so it's interesting. So with the farm, the resource investment was such. It's, yes, dividing up the cow, but also the resources that you put initially into creating and developing the farm are such that you've got to see it through longer than 4 years. But
the whole community is involved. Marriage isn't for you. Now, today, marriage is for you. If you asked a girl 200 years ago what she wanted in a husband, she would probably say, "Oh, I want somebody who, same religion, definitely, same community, definitely, right age group, hopefully, but definitely from the farm next door."
Right.
I mean, it was a career path for women and for men. And now today it's to please yourself.
Right, and we're not financially dependent upon those structures anymore, so we have that freedom, which is what we were talking about regarding polyamory.
Yes, that's right. And that's really important. The biggest trend right now is not technology. It's women piling into the job market in cultures around the world. And along with that, the economic independence, and that takes the lid off. And you can have sexual independence, social independence. And that's what we're seeing. In many respects, we're going back to the kind of women we were a million years ago.
Yes.
And that it's highly. For example, for millions of years, women commuted to work to gather their fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Came home with 60 to 80% of the evening meal. She didn't like that boy. She walked out. She tried a different one.
Yeah.
And we're getting back to that world. But you know what? People say, well, everybody's going to be polyamorous. They aren't.
Well,
they really aren't always built for that.
Now, all right. So you're tracing an arc here, and and it sounds like we're at one data point on this curve that we're tracing, where resource efficiency is at a place where people have a little bit more freedom. But then how is this arc going to end up with longer-term commitment and monogamy? Yeah, partnerships. How do we get there from here?
Great.
How does that go?
Okay, I call it fast sex, slow love. And so bottom line is, with Match, I do this annual study, Singles in America, and every year I ask, have you ever had a one-night stand? Have you ever had a friends with benefits? Have you ever lived with somebody long-term before marrying? And every year, over 50% have, not necessarily last year, but in the course of their lives, have had a one-night stand, a friends with benefits, and lived together long-term with somebody before they married. And I thought to myself, how can so many people be crazy? Everybody thinks this is reckless. And then I found a piece of data. They were studying people who were in long-term partnerships but not yet married. And 67% of them were terrified of divorce, terrified of the psychological, the social, the economic, and the legal fallout of divorce. And it began to occur to me, wait a minute, Helen, these, friends with benefits, living together, one-night stands, these days we want to know every single thing about a person before we tie the knot.
Yes.
And as a result, so I thought to myself, okay, so what we're really seeing is a real extension of the pre-commitment stage, or what I call commitment light, L-I-T-E, commitment light. And as this long courtship process extends and extends before you wed, and we're marrying later and later, you can get rid of the relationships that don't work, so that by the time you're walking down that aisle to marry somebody, you know who you got, you know you want who you got, and you think you can keep who you got. So to test out my hypothesis with Match, I did a study of 1,100 married people, not on Match, of course, and I asked a lot of questions to them. But one of the questions was, would you remarry the person you're currently married to? And 81% said yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So what I think all these polyamory people are doing, I think they're practicing. Now, some will continue to be polyamorous, but probably not a very small number will. And I think they're practicing. They've got the time to practice. They're not. They've got the money to practice. But the bottom line is the brain circuitry for romantic love will kick in, and it'll be down the road. They will have learned a lot about themselves. They will be married much later. They will have lived for a long period of time with somebody. A lot of people are even having children before they wed. And that's important too, because, I'm not advocating it, but the bottom line is you learn a lot about somebody if they suddenly become a father or a mother. And so I think we're heading towards more stable marriages, because people are marrying later, and they're marrying somebody who they understand and really want to be with. They've worked out the kinks.
Well, that's it for the first part of our interview with Dr. Helen Fisher, folks. Thanks for listening. I'll put links to Dr. Fisher's TED Talks in the show notes in case you'd like to check those out. And you might also want to look at her book, The Anatomy of Love, which is in its second edition as of Valentine's Day. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And thanks to our sponsors for this episode, Match.com. I really have to say I'm so grateful for their setting up this interview. I'm not sure it would have happened without them, and really, that alone makes their sponsorship worthwhile as far as I'm concerned. So thanks, Match. I appreciate it. And if you would like to take advantage of the special offer that Match is giving to our listeners, it's 7 days free on Match.com. Just go to Match.com/together and register for your account there. I do appreciate it. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, don't hesitate to reach out on social. We're together_show on Twitter and Instagram. And you can always email me at host@together.guide. Well, that's all for today, folks. Talk to you on Monday.